Hello, nature lovers who care. Today's conversation is going to be about the eco restoration of the central ridge in Delhi. The recent change in status of about 670 hectares of ridge land gives full control to the government of Delhi on what to do with this land. Most viewers of our channel know that the Aravalli mountain range is the oldest on earth, 1.5 billion years old. While most of the range passes through Haryana and Rajasthan, some part of it is still left in Delhi, in the central ridge and the northern ridge mostly. Today we have Valerie Scheel, who is an urban ecologist doing a PhD from the North Carolina State University of US. She is associated with Pradeep Kishan's grasshoppers, who are trying to protect the ridge and bring it back to its native glory, rather than converting it into theme parks as probably the government is wanting to do. Now, what are their concerns about the eco-restoration plans of the Forest Department of Delhi is something we would like to understand from Valerie. Valerie has visited the ridge many times, studied the ridge, and along with other grasshoppers who are all concerned citizens and young scientists and researchers who are deeply involved with urban ecology, have done a lot of research on the trees, the native creepers, the native plants, the mid-story, and even the subsoil fungi and other microorganisms which form the ridge as we have known it for the last so many years. So over to Valerie to talk about the eco-restoration project.
Okay, so thank you for having me. What would you like me to talk about?
First, let us talk about how important this central ridge is. See, what I understand is, though the ridge in Delhi area wise is not very big, its contribution to the climate, the water security and air quality of Delhi is disproportionate to the size of the ridge. Am I correct?
So I would word it a little differently. I mean, the central ridge is this huge 800 hectares of forest in the center of a city, and no less in the capital city of a country. So how many cities can boast of having such a forest in their midst? And a lot of times we tend to think about the usefulness of forest for citizens and for human beings. And of course it is, it is a huge water recharge zone. It is a huge space for carbon sequestration. I'm sure it has an impact on reducing the air pollution in its vicinity. And it's an amazing habitat for wildlife in the city. So there are all kinds of mammals and reptiles and insect and bird life that one would find there. And who knows what kind of fungi and different microorganisms are there in the soil. So it's very less researched, but I think its potential for hosting biodiversity is so big, and right in the middle of a city. So for me, that's the importance of the ridge, that we can continue to have a forest even with the city around it.
Well, I think that's very well put. As far as parks are concerned, I think around the ridge, central ridge area, there are so many parks, like the Nehru Park is there, Lodi Garden is there. Can you mention something else? These are very popular parks and man-made parks. We don't need one more man-made park around that area, if you ask me.
So, I mean, the closest parks to Central Ridge would be the Buddha Jayanti and the Mahavir Vanasthali, which were actually carved out of the Central Ridge, right? And then, of course, Nehru Park is also in its vicinity. It's not very far away. And then across the city of Delhi, we have, so Delhi is not just one type of habitat. It has different habitats. For example, the Lodi area, it has much more deeper soil. It's not part of the Aravallis and the ridge area. It was Bangar soil, so from the deep alluvial soil that exists there because of the river Yamuna. So Delhi has a heterogeneity of habitats, and of course we have all these beautiful parks meant for citizens across the city. So we have these small neighborhood parks which are there inside residential areas, and we have these larger district parks which tend to be larger, and then we have these very, very large parks like Nehru Park, Lodi Garden, now also Sundar Nursery, which are visited. Sanjay Van is actually part of the ridge. Sanjay Van is part of the ridge. Jahanpana City Forest, that's also part of the ridge.
Southern Ridge?
Those are parts of the southern or the south central ridge, yes.
South Central Ridge. Okay.
So actually in Sanjay Van also you have parts of Sanjay Van which have not been touched by the horticultural departments, and there again you can see what the ridge would have looked like or should be like. So yes, I think Delhi is very interesting in that it has a forest in the middle of a city, and not just one forest, it has patches of the forest across the city, although it has gotten fragmented. We have built all these aesthetic manicured parks in some parts of it, but we've also created other like new parks, and parks are important, right? I agree, parks are important. Public parks, the kind of manicured spaces that we also value citizens, they are important. But so are forests, and I wish that as citizens of Delhi, people of Delhi and neighboring areas, that we learn to appreciate the forests that we have in our midst. I think we haven't done that enough.
How do you think the common citizen can be made aware of the importance of having a forest in their midst?
By talking about it, like we are talking about it right now. For example, I've grown up in South Delhi. I was born and brought up there. In fact, I've grown up in a residential neighborhood which was actually carved out from the ridge 50 years back. But I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about the Aravallis till 10 years ago when it started coming up in conversations. It came to my knowledge because of Mr. Pradeep Krishan talking about it, because of other people talking about it, and we slowly started to learn about the ridge, about the Aravallis. We slowly started to understand. I started to understand, that the part of the Aravalli is right in my backyard, and these areas were never ever accessible to us as growing up because they've not been accessible to citizens. So we have to talk about it, and we have to make them accessible to people in a in a way where people can, of course, appreciate the forests and the beauty and understand, but also not convert them into manicured municipal parks. So we don't need to convert them into spaces with grassy lawns and for people to play frisbee in. We don't need that. But we need to make people aware about it. We can talk about it, we can write about it. And now there are so many people who do nature walks. For example, Sanjavan has become very popular as a spot for doing nature walks. I've also done some of them. And I am amazed at the people who come there and who take away so much from that one walk in the forest. And so I think there are people who are appreciating the forests, if only we are able to, not we, if people are able to understand them better, they will naturally appreciate the forests. So we just have to make it accessible. I think that's what we need to do.
Maybe the forest department is trying to do that.
Maybe, I agree. I mean, see, in a lot of forests in India, you have these core areas and buffer areas, right? So the core area is something which is untouched, where people cannot and should not go in. So even in a lot of tiger parks, you have these tiger safaris, they're always in the buffer area. Nothing is in the core area. But even by going to the buffer area, people are able to build an appreciation for the forest. It also does not mean that my forest has been converted into a park. It means the forest is a forest. That's an idea, right? That is just an idea. I'm not saying that's what should be done, but one of the importance for forests is for wildlife, and you have to leave it alone and intact for wildlife to survive there. That's very important. You cannot have a lot of human disturbance. So in a lot of forests in India, indigenous communities live, and that's part of them. The forest is part of them and they are part of the forest. That's a very, very different conversation. But maybe what we are seeing in Delhi in the central ridge is that I think we just need people to become aware of it. We need the forest department and other departments to also understand the forest as it is.
In fact, 860 hectares. It's almost as big as the Ranthambore National Park.
Right, right.
Right?
Yeah, and so again, I'm repeating, how lucky are we to have a forest in our midst? I mean, that's amazing. It is true though that, a lot of us cannot access it. It is true. It's almost like how many people can access the river Yamuna. So we've grown up hearing about the Yamuna. I've also heard about the Yamuna. How many times have I visited the Yamuna? And maybe I can just count on the fingers of one hand how many times I've visited, and that also just in the last few years, because I've become interested in learning about it. So I still think many of these forests in Delhi are quite inaccessible, and that's why people can't appreciate them.
I was reading that Central Ridge has got Vilayati kikar growing all over. In fact, almost 90% is covered by Vilayati kikar. That's what I hear. I don't know whether it's right.
I also don't know. So I've walked parts of it with Pradeep Krishan, and I've gone very few times. But from what I've read and what I've understood from him and his writings, yes, large parts of the Central Ridge, the tree canopy is dominated by Vilayati kikar, which is now called Neltuma juliflora. It was introduced in the Central Ridge in the late around 1919 and going onwards from there for the next 10 to 20 years, very active plantation of Vilayati kikar was done. So this was done by a Britisher called Musto, who was the superintendent of horticulture. And although the Central Ridge didn't fall in his ambit, he was very keen to afforest it. So apparently he used to go out. There's an account of him by one of his assistants, Walter George, and I've read about this in Pradeep's writing. So apparently he used to go out on Sundays in his car and have a couple of coolies or laborers with him, and he used to make space in the rocks or in the rock crevices and soil. He would ask them to make space and he would sow the seeds of Vilayati kikar. And because that plant was so superbly acclimated to the kind of soil and climate conditions that the ridge has. So this Vilaiti kikar actually comes from Central America and Mexico. Because this plant is adapted to those same conditions, it did very well. And at the same time, the other species that they were planting actively at the time were species which were not suitable to the ridge, to its thin soils, to its low moisture conditions. So none of the other species survived, and Vilaiti kikar did exceptionally well. So one is they kept on active plantation of it, and the other thing is, after independence, I think for many decades, nothing was done on the ridge. There was no intervention being taken by the forest department or anybody else. And Vilaiti kikar, by its very nature, because it did not have, it's allelopathic by nature, so it doesn't allow too many plants to grow around it, and it just took over. It just spread like wildfire. So we have large parts of the central ridge also covered by the Vilaiti kikar. And another tree that has become invasive in the ridge is this one called subabul. So again, in the last 15 years, it has taken over large parts of the ridge. And what both of these species do is, why do we call them invasive species, right? There's been a lot of debate about that as well. It's because they have a harmful effect on the native flora, fauna, and the native biodiversity of a region. So both of these species presumably have caused a lot of damage, in the sense that maybe they don't allow the growth and regeneration of a lot of native species that would have otherwise thrived and survived in this area.
So is the remedy to remove all the Vilaiti kikar, or in some areas maybe remove them and plant native species? Because after all, it's giving a green canopy and it's preserving the soil of the area. So there are so many things. The understory is still there, the mid-story is still there, and they are all maybe native things which have come up under the Vilaiti kikar.
Yes, so actually if you go to the central ridge, you'll see a few shrub species which are surviving very well in spite of Vilaiti kikar being there. I said it's allelopathic, right? But maybe it doesn't have an equal impact on all species. So some native species such as heath and gangeti, they are doing exceptionally well on the ridge, even though Vilaiti kikar is present. So maybe one way to look at it is that, why don't we start removal of Vilaiti kikar and subabul, but in a very phased manner and very slowly, where we remove only those trees, not anything else. We don't disturb the soil, we don't disturb the microorganisms present in the soil, we don't disturb the fungi, the shrub layer, the herb layer. We don't disturb any of that. We just very carefully remove just the Vilaiti kikar, just the subabul, and in place of those, maybe we do not have enough rootstock of the native trees to come back. So we can do some active regeneration and introduce back some of those native species which would have thrived there had Vilaiti kikar not been there. But this needs to be a process that is done very slowly, very carefully, because you are right, we do not want to completely remove the canopy layer. So it has to be done slowly, and we have examples of this. For example, from the Rao Jodha Park, where Vilaiti kikar was removed over a period of almost 7 years. And by the time they reached year 4 and 5, the native plants that they had planted in the first year had started to come up. So you do it very slowly and gradually, and for something the size of the ridge, it could look like a 20-year plan or a 30-year plan, because it has to be done slowly. But I think we have examples of it being done, and it is worth a try for sure.
I think you must talk more about the work Pradeep Kishan has been doing in this area. We know him only as the author of Trees of Delhi, but there is more to the man than Trees of Delhi. Please explain.
I think Trees of Delhi, what got me also started on my tree journey. When it was first published, I just came across it in my neighborhood bookstore. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what the book was. It just looked very interesting. I was interested in trees, so I picked it up. And I started walking around with it in my neighborhood, identifying the trees. And for so many, many years, I thought that was good enough, right? Just identifying trees is good. And then, I think I heard him or maybe somebody else that, talking about native trees and native plants. So that was my first introduction to that as well. Which are trees or plants or animals which are suitable to a particular area because of its climate, its geography, its landforms, its soil conditions, and that are adapted to it and that have evolved with it over hundreds of thousands of years. He has a lot of talks online. You can go and watch them. He's done this amazing restoration project in the Rao Jodha Park in Jodhpur. I highly recommend everybody go and visit that place. It's not exactly like the Central Ridge, it's quite different, but it is a rocky terrain and habitat. And it is amazing how they have managed to remove all the Vilaiti kikar from there and plant it up with natives. And it's an excellent example of a successful restoration project in India, right? But that also, I think these are the kind of examples in front of us, and we can strive towards achieving some of these things in our own landscapes and in the landscapes that we are working in. But it is important to understand what restoration means. I think that's very, very important. Even I am just beginning to learn about it, but there's an amazing community of restoration practitioners in India who are talking about it, who are talking about landscapes and how to restore them and bring back their functionality. So I think this is an exciting field to be in these days.
So, what exactly are the main objectives of eco-restoration by the Forest Department?
I don't know what the Forest Department thinks of eco-restoration. I cannot comment on what their objectives are. I can tell you what we think is happening. Is we think that unfortunately, the Forest Department is not trained in eco-restoration. That is not something they are taught. And their training is based on, I think, that 19th century forester training, which is a lot of it is about timber and how to manage timber in forests and timber production.
Exploit.
Or how to exploit, right? Because forests are what are forests called? Natural resources. So everything has become a resource to be exploited.
Right.
But the goal of ecological restoration is to think about a landscape or a patch of land or wherever you want to do it and see what would it, and most probably due to some disturbance, it could be human disturbance or natural disturbance, that landscape has become disturbed, right? Something has happened to it. And what we want to try and do is go back to that pre-disturbance time. Right. So maybe if there is mining has happened and now that's abandoned, and you want to think, what did this landscape look before it was mined? What would it have looked like? And you want to try and bring that kind of plant and animal community back to it. So restoration is about the word itself, restoration, right? It is restoring it or trying to restore it to some point where it was a healthy, thriving ecosystem.
Why do you think it's important to restore?
So in, just the times that we are living in today, we have a lot of degraded habitats and landscapes. And, often they're just left on their own, or they get exploited further in some other way. I feel like if we can bring back some of the ecosystems back, I think that's amazing. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? For example,
in what way? In what way is it? It's amazing, yes. What does it do to us? What does it do to the community, to the earth,
no, so
to the climate?
Right, we are losing so many of our landscapes to degradation in various ways, or to human activity in various ways. And so this restoration is doing the opposite of it. It is bringing back, it is resurrecting some of those ecosystems. And I mean, yes, in the larger scheme of things, we are looking at changing climate, we are looking at rapid urbanization, and we are looking at all these changes in our land and water. And I think restoration brings back some hope that something can be done about some of these spaces. And it also provides a space for all these plant and animal species to survive, because otherwise we are losing species at a very rapid pace. And if we don't do restoration, I don't know what else would we be doing.
Now, will Ria want to talk to her about the trails, possible trails, etc.?
So Valerie, it's always very nice to meet you and hear you speak and to listen to you. What I wanted to ask is, we are talking a lot about the ridge these days, but for a lot of people it's harder to communicate because they may have never experienced it for themselves. So is there anything we can do about that?
That's a very hard question to answer. So let me retract a little bit. Yes, like I have mentioned, I never knew about the ridge while growing up. I never knew about the central ridge or southern ridge or northern ridge or any of that. I had never visited the ridge until a few years back with Pradeep Krishan. So yeah, it is very challenging. It's not an area which is very accessible. I believe at one point it used to be open and accessible to all, even back in the 80s, 90s. But I don't think people really went to it. I don't know. Is it a forest and that's why people didn't go to it? Did it seem unsafe? Like, it seemed a very unsafe place to me. Yeah. But also then, I think it was during the Commonwealth Games that they kind of built a wall around it. So, I think they were trying to demarcate it or maybe beautify it in whatever way. But first, there was the wall that was put. But now with these conversations, and I think last year they also put a gate on the entrance, which is from the Sardar Patel Marg. And now that gate is kept locked. So I don't think people can visit it. It's also declared as a reserved forest. So people are not allowed to visit a reserved forest. So I don't know how to help people visit it. It needs to be a conversation with the authorities, with the Delhi government, with the forest department, with civil society organizations about how to make it more accessible to people without, of course, impacting it in any negative way. Yeah. And that's why we are talking about it so that we can tell people what's happening over there. But I agree, it's not a place I feel that people are able to visit just any time and all on their own. Because it is being kept, gate locked.
But what I absolutely loved from our conversation today and with ma'am was about bringing it back into conversation, making it part of our conversations in daily life. Also, what is your take on eco-restoration? Why do you think it's important in today's time especially?
So what we are seeing is that a lot of our landscapes are getting degraded because of human activity across the earth. And so I think restoration is it's a small endeavor where we are trying to reverse some of that damage. And because these lands are being left in such a manner that they cannot they do not have the power to naturally regenerate themselves anymore. So they need a helping hand. And in restoration, we are providing that helping hand. So maybe it's a drop in the ocean, in this larger like poly crisis that we are living in. We talk about climate change and land degradation, as I've talked about it. We talk about changes due to rapid urbanization. And what restoration, I think it's like a beacon of hope. So what it's trying to do is restore some of that land back, give it a helping hand to get it back to a more natural space, and convert it back into what we hope can be a thriving ecosystem again, and can provide a home for all the flora and fauna it was meant to in the first place itself.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. Yes.